Hi, I'm Michael Turton, and I'm here today with Michael Fahey, who is a lawyer with Winkler Partners here in Taipei, and has been involved with things Taiwan now since the late 1980s, and is one of the most knowledgeable and intelligent and well-informed people on Taiwan that I know. And it's a real pleasure to have you on the show today, Michael.
Well, thank you for the very kind introduction, Michael.
It's a shame that everyone in our generation is named Michael. We have to go back and sue our parents or something. So you first came to Taiwan when? In 1988?
In 1988, 6 months after martial law had been lifted.
Oh, yeah.
And I came here. I took a year off from college where I was studying Chinese, not very successfully. And at that time, studying in China was prohibitively expensive, but I had heard from other people who were studying Chinese that you could come to Taiwan and teach English and make enough money to study Chinese at the same time. So I took the plunge and came and more or less did that for 6 months here in Taiwan, and then had the opportunity to make a very long, about 6-month trip through Southeast Asia, Thailand,
Sure.
especially Indonesia.
Yeah.
And that kind of hooked me. So I went back to the States, graduated from college. It was, people probably forget about it now, but it was a kind of a recession at the time, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. But I knew that I could, make enough money to travel and continue studying Chinese. So coming back to Taiwan was an easy decision.
Sure.
And then I spent 4 or 5 years here, which was a really exciting time because that's when Taiwanese society was really opening up after martial law.
Yeah.
Martial law didn't end the day it was proclaimed. For a number of years after that, people were very nervous about talking about politics, and older people especially were understandably concerned that martial law might be reimposed and anything they said held against them.
Sure.
But in the student districts, I was studying at Shida, the Mandarin Training Center.
Uh-huh.
And down there in the Taida, Shida, student ghetto issue, that's where most of the cafes and bars and stuff were in Taipei at that time. There were very few. And I met a lot of young, interesting Taiwanese people, and also foreigners from all over the world. And it was kind of a petri dish for what we see in Taiwan today. It was
Right,
really
right.
the beginnings of an open society. So that was really fun. And around the same time, I was forced by a friend to buy a bicycle and start cycling, which took me out of Taipei into the mountains and down the East Coast and all over the place, and really opened my eyes to the beauty of Taiwan and how much of Taiwan that's important is not in Taipei City.
Sure.
And so that was kind of the beginning of my delayed love affair with Taiwan. It wasn't love at first sight, but it, as with many of us, it grew upon me.
Right.
And then I went back to the States for a few years to graduate school in Chinese studies, and then decided I didn't want to be an academic, and came back around 1997, 1998, and I've been here pretty much since.
Yeah. You were the person that actually introduced me to cycling. We had that long trip down the East Coast, and I'm forever in your debt for that.
Well, it was a lot of fun. I've had the pleasure of introducing quite a few people to cycling in Taiwan. It's something that I really enjoy sharing. There's all kinds of cycling. You see people out on these road bikes who are going, 1 million kilometers an hour and stuff like that. And I do enjoy a fast, challenging ride, but I'm also very happy to, take it slow and stop for coffees and, help somebody.
Whoa, wait, I've ridden with you. I know. Is this a Michael Fahey ride? There's no lunch.
we try to fit in lunch.
Yeah. So you had worked on Forward Taiwan on immigration issues. You worked with them? or you were, what was that?
Well, lawyers are supposed to do pro bono work,
right?
And I'm a lawyer in California, not in Taiwan. And California lawyers have an ethical obligation to do 50 hours of pro bono work a year. Now you're encouraged to do that for, people who can't afford legal services and that kind of thing, but it can be anything that's in the public interest.
Right.
And I was looking around for something, meaningful to devote those hours to. And initially I was thinking about getting involved in some of the issues that affect migrant workers,
right,
and marriage migrants who have many challenges. However, I quickly discovered that while they have many challenges, they also have some very articulate and prominent advocates in Taiwanese society already.
Right.
Especially some very prominent academics and people like that. And what at the same time, I was having a conversation with a Taiwanese businessman who's fairly prominent named Zhu Ping, who's a bit of a public intellectual as well as a very successful businessman. Mm-hmm. And he was complaining because he had set up this thing called the Red Room, which I believe is still going. It's kind of a artistic space.
Yeah, I think you brought me over there once, many years ago.
Yeah, quite possibly. They've been going for a number of years, and they have all kinds of drama and
that's in
poetry
Xindian,
slams.
Right?
They've had it in a few different locations.
Oh, I see.
At one point, it was at Kongzong. I think it's moved again since then.
Okay.
But he was meeting a lot of young foreigners who he felt were talented, and it would be nice if they could stay in Taiwan. But all of them kind of faced a similar problem. The only thing they could do in Taiwan was teach English. They couldn't find other kinds of employment because of the work permit rules.
Right.
And so we had a long lunch talking about that, and then I reflected on my own long personal experience with the immigration system in Taiwan, because I've kind of been here since the beginning,
right?
From the early days when it basically didn't exist until the mid 90s when it started getting codified, and then 1999 permanent residence came along, and I went through all those phases of getting some of the first work permits, and then getting a very early permanent residence and so on. And I remembered those struggles.
Sure.
And so I thought, and I kind of talked to some other people, and I realized that at least at that time, which was around 2013, there wasn't really anybody advocating for what we would broadly call foreign professionals. That includes people who do, engineers and people who work in the electronics industry, editors, marketers, teachers of all kinds, including bushiban teachers, and people in sports and this kind of thing. Basically, anyone who's not a migrant worker is a foreign professional.
Right.
And, I kind of asked around and looked around and saw that really not very much had been done in this area for more than a decade. And I decided, with Zhu Ping's encouragement, that maybe this was something that I could work on. And so Zhu Ping organized Forward Taiwan and got some prominent Taiwanese business people to endorse it. And that's how all that started.
So what kind of things did you do then with Forward Taiwan? What kinds of policies did you advocate for? What did you look at? That kind of, what were you doing?
Well, it was the first thing we did was we did a whole inventory of all the immigration and work permit issues that we could find, and we went through all the regulations.
Oh my God!
and came up with a list of like 20 or 30 proposals to change them. So for example, one issue at the time was that there were a very small number, but an increasing number of children of foreign nationals. So both parents are foreign nationals who had grown up in Taiwan.
Oh, yes.
And were often more culturally Taiwanese than they were, they had more connections to they'd been educated in the Taiwanese school system. They'd gone to college in Taiwan. But at that time, they pretty much had to leave when they were 20.
Right.
And that often meant going back to a country where they had, really no life experience and sometimes no family. And, it was very traumatic for them. So that was one issue that we got involved in and started advocating for right away. Another issue was making it easier for Taiwanese foreign graduates of Taiwanese universities to get work permits.
Oh, yeah. I remember when that finally came down. Yeah.
Right. And that resulted in a point system that's allowed thousands of foreign graduates to stay in Taiwan. There were tiny issues like around 2014, 2015, there was one of these sporadic roundups of foreign musicians and performers, which seems to happen every 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
And, we had long talks with the Ministry of Labor and the Taipei Department of Labor to try to, come up with some kind of solution to that. We had some partial success with that. We got them to say that, truly amateur performances, are not going to get you in trouble with the labor laws. Those are okay. And another issue that we were working on was one of the main barriers for one of the problems that Taiwan has in attracting foreign professionals is that pay in Taiwan is low.
Yes.
So, Taiwan always wants to recruit, people who have, 10 years of experience and are experts in their fields. But most Taiwanese companies, there are exceptions, but many Taiwanese companies don't pay the kinds of salaries that these people would be making in Europe or the US.
Right. So,
we thought that the people who are the most likely to work in Taiwan are people who are recent graduates who haven't been, they're just starting their careers. They're interested in learning Chinese. They're willing to sacrifice a couple years of relatively low pay for the experience and that kind of thing. But they were blocked by this rule that says you have to have 2 years of relevant work experience to get a non-English teaching work permit.
Right.
And so, we said we should get rid of that rule as well. That rule is currently still in place and we're still working on it, although there's some hope of it being relaxed. So there were many, many issues that came up. Permanent residence for spouses of foreign nationals who'd been here forever.
Oh, yes.
There was the issue of university faculty members who were not, when they retired, unlike their Taiwanese colleagues, they didn't have an election between getting a monthly pension payment and taking the entire pension as a lump sum, which has adverse tax consequences. And if you live longer, you might get more through the monthly. But most of them would have liked to have opted for the monthly payment system. So that was another issue. So there were many, many issues like that. And we had, the strategy was to start with things that were in regulations as opposed to laws. So a regulation is something that the executive branch can usually change without going to the legislative yuan, which is much more complicated.
Right.
And so, we started with easier things that could be changed by regulations. And, we moved up to things like dual nationality, which is going to require a change to the Nationality Act, for example. That was the most difficult and the lowest priority because we realized that it was going to be the biggest struggle. I'm happy to say that over that time, many of the issues that we brought up back in 2014 have been resolved. There's been a lot of progress. There are still outstanding issues like the 2-year work experience rule, and the big one that Forward Taiwan is going to be focused on. COVID has disrupted things because legislators and that kind of thing aren't really in the mood to talk about immigration at the moment. But once things settle down, the really big issue that's remaining is improved access to dual nationality, and we can talk about that a little bit more later.
Yeah.
So that's in a nutshell what Forward Taiwan has been doing.
And it's still doing it. You guys are still around?
Yeah. I think that after there are kind of waves of activity. We got a lot of regulatory changes done, and then there was at the end of 2017 there was something called the Act for the Recruitment and Employment of Foreign Professionals.
Yeah, which.
Among other things, created the employment gold card that has been, a big innovation. And, after a law like that is passed, a whole bunch of subsidiary regulations have to be put into place to make the law actually work. So, for the next 6 months, we were kind of, huddled with government agencies and not doing very much public stuff, but we were, meeting with them. And so that may have been perceived as a bit of a lull. And then the government came up with something called the new Economic Immigration Act, which would have really been kind of a radical step forward. And we had lots of discussions with them while they were drafting that, and some of our ideas were adopted and some of them weren't. And then, the election happened and COVID-19 happened, and, we haven't had as much access recently. But so we're currently kind of in the stage of trying to develop a strategy, an effective strategy for advocating for better access to dual nationality. That's going to be really difficult. Some thought and planning has to go into that.
If listeners want to get involved in this, what should they do? Do you need people? Do you need resources? What kind of things can people like me do, for example?
Well, I think that one idea that we've had is that we're seriously considering setting up a registered association, an NGO, which would be an NGO, something like Permanent Residents of Taiwan Association,
right?
And trying to get there are now, this is news, just at the end of August, the number of permanent residents hit 20,000.
That's from all foreign countries?
From all foreign countries.
20,000 of us.
There are 20,000 of us now. So that number has doubled in the last decade, and has been increasing by 2,000, 2,500 a year in the last several years. So it's going to keep growing. In a few years, there's going to be 30,000 of us. And permanent residents, I think, are the ideal candidates, possibly after a period of permanent residence, maybe 7 years, 5 years, 10 years, 3 years, hopefully, where they would be able to become dual nationals, more or less automatically if they haven't done anything wrong and paid their taxes and that kind of thing. So I think it might be very effective to have an association of permanent residents whose first objective would be to advocate for dual nationality for permanent residents. So if we get that off the ground and get that registered, something you could do would be to join it. We're thinking about some very polite and, of course, lawfully registered protests, or gatherings anyway, in front of the Legislative Yuan, hopefully with people bringing their kids and, showing that we're integrally part of Taiwanese society. And I think it would get a lot of media attention.
For sure.
And so even if just a few hundred people showed up, I think it would be...
Yep.
It would
even
be,
a few score. We'd all be Chinese speakers, and we'd have our kids there. Hey, here's my son. He was in the army.
Yeah, I've lived here in Taiwan this long, and I've been paying taxes all this time. And there's a million or more Taiwanese who have dual citizenship in other countries that just makes Taiwan stronger. And so why can't we be included in this? So I think that would be that would be in a little bit of financial support. We'd probably have some minor dues of a few hundred NT a year or something like that. I think that would be the channel that we're going to try to get people involved in.
That would be awesome. I would certainly join that and support it.
You'd be very welcome. And we're of course hoping that, because the permanent residents are a very diverse group of people. I mean, a lot of them are in the Taipei area, but they're all over the island.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Japanese permanent residents,
that's
Korean
right.
permanent residents, Malaysian permanent residents, so it's going to have to be something that, cuts across the sometimes insular little communities of foreigners in Taiwan.
Sure.
And become something broader.
Be a good way to meet people too.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good way to bring people together.
Yeah. So you just mentioned the immigration gold card. What is this? What is this program that?
Okay, that's the employment gold card.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And that's something very innovative that was the National Development Council's idea. It wasn't our idea. They modeled it on similar programs in New Zealand and Singapore. And what it is that you there are 8 different areas. Economics, which kind of means general business. There's finance, culture, sports, science and technology, so there are these 8 different areas that you can apply in. And if you meet their qualifications and have the documents that they want, which is the key point, then you get this card, which is basically looks like an ARC, except that it combines a work permit, an ARC, a visa to come to Taiwan if you're not in Taiwan already, and a re-entry permit. So it's a 4-in-1 card. And everyone applies for 3 years and everyone gets 3 years. The number one attraction of it for people is its flexibility, because unlike an ordinary work permit, it's not tied to your employer. It's yours personally. So in that sense, it's very similar to the work permits that permanent residents and spouses of Taiwanese citizens have. You can use that gold card to do basically any kind of professional work. You could work for an employer in the US, you could work for an employer in Taiwan, you could do freelance projects, you could take 6 months off and study Chinese and then start your own company. So that flexibility, not being tied to an employer, and having 3 years to, find yourself in Taiwan is, makes it very attractive to people.
I know several people who've gotten it who are quite happy with it.
Yes, and it's attracted they've had a number of events bringing people and it's a really diverse group. Everybody from people who are running, high-end coffee import businesses from Central America to Finnish dancers to German piano players, pianists, of course, lots of people who are, coders and tech people and that kind of thing. One thing I should mention, just very quickly, is there's often a lot of confusion among the tech people about what category they should apply in. And it is confusing because naturally they see a field called technology, which is monitored by the Ministry of Science and Technology, and they all apply in that category. But actually, most of them, if you're if what you primarily do is write code, you should actually be applying in the economics category, because the technology category is really for people who do research and development. So if you have patents, if you've developed some kind of, framework that's open source framework that's used by millions of people all over the world, then yes, you go apply under science and technology. But if you're somebody who's been working for, you have a degree in computer science and you've been working as a coder in San Francisco for 5 years, you should be applying in economics.
I think that was the exact problem one of my friends had.
A lot of people have had that problem.
Yeah.
And the easiest way to apply for it is based on salary. So if you had a salary that's the equivalent of 160,000 NT a month, that's about 5,500 US dollars these days, at any time in the last 3 years, you can apply based on the salary. And if you're an American, you would produce your W-2 form, which shows how much your employer reported in taxation and salary. It's got to be salary and wages, though. So some entrepreneurs who don't make salary haven't been able to get it. That's kind of an oversight in the whole system. So there are some quirks to it, but 1,000 people have gotten it as of the end of last month, and they're really having an impact, I think, especially on the startup scene, because there's a lot more talent available here in Taiwan.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing that, like right now, Cambodia is a popular destination for people who code. Mm-hmm. Right, it's cheap to live in, and that's the kind of people that Taiwan could easily appeal to with a card like this, because Taiwan is such a nice place to live. Yeah,
right, exactly. I think that obviously the cost of living in Cambodia is lower than Taiwan, but I think maybe the internet is faster and more reliable, and I think it's fair to say that Taiwan is a little bit safer than Cambodia,
and better healthcare.
And another real advantage of Taiwan is that it's only an 11-hour, in non-COVID times, it's only an 11-hour flight to San Francisco.
Right.
So. That's not a short flight, but it's different than 18 hours. You can go back to the Silicon Valley regularly, and for some reason, Taiwan seems to really attract people from San Francisco and the Silicon Bay area who are fed up with the really high cost of living there and are looking for something different, but don't want to cut off their ties entirely.
Right.
Another cohort that is very interested in living in Taipei are, long-term expats and business people in China, because there's a widespread perception that China is becoming, a less friendly place and a less safe place to live. And then there are environmental considerations like pollution and that kind of thing. And so we're seeing people who are, maybe they're continuing to work in China, especially in Shanghai.
Right.
Because again, in normal times, it's a very short flight to Shanghai. You could work there during the week and come back to Taipei, with your family on the weekends. So those are two, I think, real selling points, along with the national healthcare system, that Taiwan has over, some of the other countries in Southeast Asia. Of course, there's been a dramatic uptick in interest since the travel restrictions came in March. We always knew that there were quite a few people who were, using the visa-free entry to come in and out of Taiwan every 3 months, and we're working here as digital nomads, or sometimes we're retired here or doing different things. Yeah. And then when the travel restrictions hit and people couldn't come and go, there was a real wave of people who were trying to regularize their status, and there was a huge uptick in the number of employment. Before March, there were maybe 500 gold card holders. And now there are 1,000, so it doubled. Took 2 years to get to 500, and then it doubled in 4 months. I think most of the the upsurge has kind of died down now. So there was a situation where it was taking 6, 8, 9 weeks to get approval, but it's now back down to the normal 3 or 4 weeks. So now if you haven't applied already and you're interested, now is a good time to apply.
Did you hear that, listeners? So you had, you've had so much experience. You were educated in California, right? That's where you did your legal. That's where you went to law school, right?
Right.
And you passed California bar, but then you've also been involved with the law here for so long. How do you see the two legal systems? What are the differences? What are the interesting differences anyway?
Well, of course, the legal system in California is part of what we call the Anglo-American legal system, or the common law system.
Yeah.
And which is almost exclusively used in English-speaking countries, in particular countries that were colonies of England at one time, including the United States. And most of the rest of the world uses what's called the civil law system, which is, or sometimes they call it the continental legal system, which is, the legal system that was developed out of, was kind of based on Roman and Byzantine law, and then was, majorly updated first by the Napoleonic codes in the early 19th century, and then really reached its modern form in the German legal codes in the mid 19th century. And those are pretty much the model for the rest of the world. Almost no country in the world has looked at the American or the English system and said, we're going to adopt that.
Why not? What's wrong with us?
Well, there's nothing really wrong with us. It's just that it's just a very different system because, at least in theory, in the civil law countries, all of the laws are written down in codes where anybody can look up what the law is, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it.
Right.
Whereas in the Anglo-American system, there are certainly many, many laws that are, written down, but a lot of law is what they call judge-made law. It's based on precedent.
Right.
So there's no law saying that, a woman has a right to an abortion. That law is encapsulated in a court decision, a Supreme Court decision. So the courts can make the law where the legislators have not made law. They can fill in the gaps. And that's very difficult to adapt because it's very specific to each country. So for example, there's all kinds of laws about domestic animals. Like, if it's a domestic animal and you own it and it goes and digs up somebody else's crops, you're liable. But if if it's a wild animal that just happens to live on your land and it goes up and digs up somebody's crops, then you're not liable. So this distinction between domestic and wild animal is very important. Well, in the United States, domestic animals would probably include, your dog, your milk cow, this kind of thing. But in Burma, the common law has developed to include elephants. So it's highly particularized in each country. So it's very hard for somebody to adapt it, just kind of lock, stock, and barrel. Unless it's been evolving there for hundreds of years. So countries that are coming up with new legal systems, like Japan in the 1870s or China in the 1930s, have invariably chosen the civil law system.
I see. Okay. Why don't we take a short break here? So moving on from those elephants in Burma that have been encoded in law, I think we had just talked about, just during the break, we discussed the debate about the jury system here incorporating the U.S. jury system into the local legal system? How is that going to work? What's going on with that?
Well, they're not going to incorporate the jury system. They're going to the government has gone with something that they call citizen judges, which is a system that's used in Japan in serious criminal cases. And you have, in murder and a few other cases, I think with, a potential sentence of 7 years or more, you have 3 professional judges and 4 lay judges who sit together and hear the case. But the lay judges can't outvote the professional judges. I think at least 2 of the professional judges have to join in their decision. And this is supposed to make, it's supposed to build trust in the system. And
how are the lay judges chosen?
They're going to be chosen at random, sort of like the way jury members are chosen from the public.
Is the defense going to have any right to say, I don't like this lay judge? He's prejudiced against Aborigines, or he's whatever?
At least as well, the detailed regulations aren't out, but that's called voir dire, and that's the system of challenging jurors in a jury system.
In the jury system.
It's a very important part of the jury system, and as far as we know, they're not going to have that.
Wow.
The movement to introduce juries in Taiwan was spearheaded by defense lawyers. It was the cynics might say that the reason they wanted is because once you're indicted, once you're prosecuted, the prosecutor makes a decision to indict you for a criminal matter, the conviction rates are very, very high. They're well over 80%. They're not 98% like they are in Japan, but they're very, very high, except in a few areas like insider trading where they're more like 50-50. And I think that some people think that the defense lawyers were hoping to do that because, a expert defense lawyer can appeal to the emotions of jurors and stuff who are not trained, professional decision makers. And they, especially if you have to have a unanimous decision, all you got to do is get one person to disagree with the verdict and you could get your client off. But I've been to quite a few I was very curious about this, and I've been to quite a few of their meetings, and I can say that these people, I think, truly believe that the jury system is better in determining the facts of a case, which is, of course, what juries do in the United States. They don't decide what law is applied. They just decide, did so and so stab that person on the night of the 25th or whatever,
right?
So they decide very important facts like, was this person so insane at the time they committed their crime that they could not distinguish right from wrong? That's not a decision a judge makes in the United States. It's a decision that the jury makes.
But in Taiwan, the judge makes that decision.
In Taiwan, the judge makes that decision, which actually puts a lot of pressure on judges because, we've had several recent very high-profile cases where the insanity defense was successfully invoked and it's very unpopular everywhere.
Yeah, several of my students in the high school are writing essays against it.
Yeah, it's very unpopular, and it's very rare that it's successful in the U.S. But from the judge's point of view, that's the decision that the jury made, not based on their common sense and their common experience.
Right.
It's not a factual decision that the judge has to make. And a lot of the times, the Taiwanese public's criticism of judges has to do with factual determinations that they make. And so if we had a jury system, then the juries would be making those decisions, and then the judges would be applying the law.
Right.
But I have my personal doubts about whether or not this would work that successfully. What you would be doing is grafting on, a very alien part of the Anglo-American legal system onto the civil law system.
Yeah.
And there are all kinds of other rules about evidence that make a jury system work in the United States. Now, many critics say they're too complicated, but very often, there's a fight between the lawyers about what kind of evidence the jurors can see. For example, if there was an illegal search and they found contraband in somebody's house, then the defense lawyer is going to say, hey, that was a search without a warrant. And then the jury never hears about the contraband that was found in that house. So their decision about the facts is made without knowing that guy had 10 kilos of heroin in his house, which can color somebody's decision.
Right.
Now in Taiwan, because the judges are professional decision makers who hear these cases all the time and are trained not to be swayed by emotion or that kind of thing, and they're very good. I mean they're much more capable of doing that than ordinary people are. If there's an illegal search and they found contraband, the judge hears that evidence along with all the other evidence. Now, the judge increasingly will say that, okay, I know about that evidence, but because it was obtained unlawfully, I'm not going to consider it my decision. I'm just going to, hive it off, and it's not going to appear in the judgment. But he still knows about it.
Yeah.
So that in the U.S., the judge plays this really important job as a gatekeeper for what kind of evidence, like, is it relevant that the person had previous criminal convictions? Sometimes it is, like fraud, if the current case is bank fraud, but sometimes it isn't. It's not always comes in that, the fact that if somebody committed murder before and now they're on charge for murder again, if the jurors know that he committed murder before, they're going to be so influenced by that knowledge that they're just going to say, oh, well, he did it before, so he definitely did it this time. So,
right.
So that might be excluded. Taiwan has no rules of evidence like that. It would require a massive overhaul of the system, and I don't think they're ready for that. And I don't think they would know how to do it. There's a previous example from about 20 years ago. Cross-examination, where the lawyers from both sides ask questions of a witness, is called the crucible of truth in the American legal system. And it was brought to the Taiwanese legal system with much fanfare 20 years ago. And it is now universally considered to have been a total failure. The lawyers don't know how to cross-examine. It's not a crucible of truth. It's just a formality at the end of the case. The judges don't want to hear it. And so we already have another example of something that was considered very important in the US legal system that was going to revolutionize the Taiwanese one that failed to do it. So I'm open to the idea of juries in the Taiwanese system, but I have reservations about how well it would actually work. It's really kind of alien to this kind of legal system.
Oh. Well, I think it's been a fascinating sitting here listening to you today, and useful. Hey guys, when this NGO for permanent residence is set up, hope to see you all joining it, and maybe someday we'll all be standing in front of the legislative unit.
Bring your kids.
Bring your kids. All right. Well, thanks, Mike. It's really been a pleasure.
Great. Nice talking to you always, Michael.
This has been brought to you by the Taiwan Report. For more content like this, become our patron at report.tw.
哎呦，就是那个台湾狗啦，最喜欢我的台湾狗了。